știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Spre țărul pe drum știut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. E pentru că pe lume partidul s-a dulci cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce-nseamnă ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut.
невостяк, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
Hello everybody and welcome along. It is the evening of the 6th of July 2026 and we are coming to you tonight with a live stream on the interesting subject of Irish neutrality, so called, and why the formal end to that is, if not upon us already, then rapidly being plotted by those in the EU and of course their cringing servants within Dublin. Now, we'll get to that in just a moment, as we shall also get to later the big World Cup story of the last couple of days. No, it's not Scotland going out. No, it's not England's win against Mexico. It's the Donald Trump effect. Trump, as he always does, reveals the essence of something very quickly. And that is perhaps his greatest gift, and certainly a gift to us. So we are currently live on YouTube and on X and on Rumble and on Twitch and on Substack. So be sure to check us out on all of those platforms. Be sure to subscribe on all of those platforms, and be sure to share this stream around and about the place. We've got a fair few people in the chat already, so let's go straight over to them and say hello. We have Akhmadovich Naz from Moscow. Hello to you. We have Ekaterina Treskina, who says, Privyet is Voronezh. You're coming from, hello from Voronezh, I'm guessing. Tell me if that my dimly remembered Cyrillic has paid off for me there. So hello to Speedy from Norfolk. We also say hello to Johan Krober, coming to us from Denmark. We have Non Zenzi 1554. We have Mikey from Providence Metro, New England Imperial Hegemon. Internationalist greetings to you, Mike. We have Jerry from down there, way down south on the south coast of England. We have Spiral Alice coming to us from the west of Ireland, who says the propaganda against neutrality is incessant. We have V. Olafsdottir coming to us from Iceland. We have Peep Show 090 coming to us from the hell pit itself, London, no offence. We have Mushkin coming to us from Gloucestershire. I won't do the accent. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in so far. Again, be sure to subscribe on all platforms. Be sure to like the stream and share it or retweet it. Various other things that you can do to boost the reach of this show, which of course will be inevitably throttled by a combination of the British government and YouTube's own algorithm. But the word must go forth. And the word of today is corruption. Now, let's get straight into the Irish story, because as our Irish correspondent, Spiral Alice from the west of Ireland, says, the propaganda against Irish neutrality is incessant. And it's the same propaganda with Irish characteristics that is used to beat the drum for increased war spending in Britain, which is the Russian threat, the Russian threat. Ireland is being threatened by Russian drones. Zelensky is in Ireland and he is being threatened by Russian drones. No evidence is ever presented of this, and there is never any clear evidence in the Irish government's own examination of these so-called threats that from drones or whatever else, that the Russians are up to anything in Ireland or have any scheme they have drawn up to threaten Ireland. Because let's be absolutely clear, there is no Russian threat that exists along the lines that the idiots and the propagandists and the liars in Britain and elsewhere are babbling on about. There is no Russian threat to the rest of Europe. There wasn't really even a Russian threat to Ukraine until 2014, when one was created by the British and the Americans and the French and the Germans. The Russian threat is a concoction, and to claim that Ireland is all over there on the far western edge of Europe, which, as the name might imply, it's an island, the island of Ireland, which has not gone to war with anybody except, of course, the former colonial master Britain in the last 120 years, which has never had a reason to be undergoing active hostilities with the Russian Federation, which has no reason to either instigate hostilities or receive hostilities. There is no reason whatsoever why the Russians would be threatening the security of Ireland. Zero. It's a lie. From top to bottom, it's a lie. Then again, the Russians had no real reason to go after Sweden or Finland either. And they were pushed into NATO by a political class which, let's be completely honest, is completely beholden to Berlin, Paris, London, and Washington. And that is what is up with the case at issue in Ireland. Now, some of the more sophisticated propagandists, I say slightly more sophisticated propagandists in the Republic of Ireland, will concede that there is not a direct Russian threat to Ireland, that the Russians aren't parachuting into Dublin or Sligo or County Wexford, nor are Russian submarines prowling off the coast of Ireland with looking at launching some kind of amphibious assault on the west coast of Ireland. The more sophisticated propagandists will concede that that's not an issue, but they will say, And I've heard Irish liberals, that most wretched breed, make this point that, oh, well, Ireland needs to do its bit for collective European security. It's a big talking point amongst the Irish petty bourgeoisie, those who love the EU far more than they love Ireland itself. So that is a slightly more coherent talking point, because the claim of a direct Russian threat to Ireland itself is nonsense. But so you get this argument from some petty bourgeois liberals in Ireland that Ireland needs to contribute towards European remilitarization, to take on the Russian threat to all of Europe. But then again, this also collapses under the slightest of examinations. It collapses when you examine, well, what exactly is this supposed Russian threat? Given that there has now been a war rumbling in Ukraine for 4 years following direct Russian intervention, a war that has been rumbling on for now over 12 years, since 2014, a war that was, let's be clear, created by the actions of the NATO countries and, of course, the European Union. That is what was done. Now, speaking of, I was tweeting earlier about our old friend Nigel Farage, who has become a rabid Russophobe as he's got edged closer to power. He actually used to say such things in the European Parliament when he was a member of it, that the EU was creating a situation where there would be hostilities would be opened up against Russia. And this is what they created when they backed the coup in Ukraine in 2014. And it's a situation that they sought to create for many years. Going all the way back to the 1990s, there was a concerted push to create a situation where the NATO bloc would control Ukraine and use Ukraine to tie into the article really I wrote on my Substack earlier, which is to use Ukraine, as Zelensky has said, as a big Israel, meaning that it can be, so they can turn Ukraine into something which can act as a source of permanent instability and destabilization, essentially, with regard to Russia, and to damage any attempt that the Russians make towards Eurasian economic integration that can always be threatened by a NATO-aligned Ukraine being a militarized outpost on the edge of Russia's western borders. And that's a far more threatening outpost for the Russians in terms of it being a base for NATO than like the Baltic states. The Baltic states can be overrun in a day by the Russians. Ukraine, as has been seen over the last 4 years, is a much tougher nut to crack. And of course, we should mention at this stage, it has been given several different armies worth of equipment and money by its backers in Europe. Now, returning to the subject of Irish neutrality, so the threat that the Irish liberals claim that they want to protect Ireland from is a threat that was created by the European Union and NATO itself, by the machinations of the imperialist powers. That the Russian invasion of Ukraine was an invasion that they wanted to happen. They wanted to bring the Russians into Ukraine because they believed that by a combination of military and economic and diplomatic means, they could inflict at least what appeared to be a defeat and destabilize the Putin system. That is what they wanted. This isn't speculation. This is openly admitted to by various different characters who've either been in power or are in power in Europe. So the idea of the Russian threat is a nonsense. The Russians don't have the capability to invade any other countries. Like this is not the Soviet Union. This is a capitalist country that is far weaker than even the late period Soviet Union was. It poses a threat to none of the major countries in Europe. I don't think it would even pose much of a threat to Poland, really, but with regard to direct military invasion. Now, of course, the Russians can do a lot of damage using their immense amount of missiles, but I don't think the Russians have any interest in invading Poland, or even invading the wretched Baltic states. Why on earth would they want them? Never mind Finland or Sweden. Again, this is all a concoction. The aggressor is NATO. The aggressor is the EU. That's what's going on here. And it's, again, this is a very deliberately designed scheme. So let's get into the question of Irish neutrality here, and because there's a lot that we need to cover. So this is a several part investigation, shall we say? So the justification for the push for increased Irish defence spending is the incredible threat posed by the evil Putin, a man more evil than Stalin, Ivan the Terrible, and pick your Bond villain, and Blofeld combined. That's what they're told. We're told that Ireland, a nation of 5 million people with minimal standing army, no military tradition of aggression, and no territorial disputes with any power other than, of course, Britain, must double, triple, or perhaps quadruple its defence spending, must join NATO, must abandon the last pretense of independence and submit fully to the Euro-Atlantic security architecture. What we're not told, and what cannot be spoken within the official discourse of the Irish political class, the British press, or the Atlantic Council briefings, is, of course, who does actually occupy Irish territory? Who is actually a real and genuine threat to Irish independence, and has been ever since Ireland struggled to obtain that independence? Who maintains a permanent military garrison on the island of Ireland? Who has used Irish space and territory for military renditions, overflights, and intelligence operations for a century or more? Who is the real proximate and permanent threat to Irish sovereignty? It isn't fucking Russia. The answer is Britain. And that answer, of course, cannot be spoken by the Irish political class, never mind by the British press, or the clowns in the European press, or the Americans. Because, as James Connolly foresaw more than a century ago, the Irish political class has long been structurally subordinated to imperialism. First the British imperialists, then the French and the German imperialists, and the Americans. This isn't a conspiracy. This isn't an accident. This is the material reality of Irish capitalism, which is so weak, so parasitic, so financialized, so dependent on capital flows from the United States, Europe, and so dependent on the British export market that it's incapable of what we refer to as autocentric growth. It is dependent upon the major imperialist powers for whatever growth does occur. And therefore, when imperialism demands that Ireland join NATO and spend more money on weaponry and become ever more subordinated to the US imperialist bloc, the politicians in Dublin dutifully say, yes, sir, and salute, or feebly agree. I think we're saying yes, sir, and saluting. It implies altogether more vigor than the likes of Michael Martin and Simon Harris have. So this is not a question of politics catching up with ideology. This is ideology, the ideology of Atlanticism, of European integration, of so-called shared values, of so-called collective security. This catching up with the material reality of Irish capitalism. The material reality is that Ireland has never really and truly been neutral. The material reality is that Irish sovereignty has always been conditional. The material reality is that the Irish state has functioned as a subordinate node within the Anglo-American imperialist system since its inception. What we're witnessing now is merely the formalization of what has always been true. So tonight we're going to examine the concrete data, the historical continuity, and the structural determinants and class forces that are driving this further transformation of the abandonment of the pretense of Irish neutrality. So let's start with numbers, because numbers tell a story that the rhetoric here deliberately obscures. In October of last year, 2025, the Irish government announced a record defence budget of €1.5 billion for 2026. This represents an 11% increase year on year and a 35% increase since 2022. Capital funding of the 1.7 billion euros has been allocated for the period 2026 to 2030, an increase of 600 million euros or 55% on the previous baseline. The government has committed to reaching 3 billion in annual defence spending by 2028, which would represent approximately 1.4% of gross national income. Now, to put this in context, Ireland currently spends 0.22% of GDP on defence, the lowest in the European Union. The European median is approximately 1.5 to 1.8%. NATO members commit to a minimum 2%. Even other neutral countries spend more. Austria spends 0.99%, Switzerland 0.69%, and Malta 0.38%. The Irish government presents this increase as modest, as catching up, as merely achieving the capability for self-defence. But the trajectory is unmistakable. The 2026 budget includes 300 million euros in capital funding, the highest ever level, with almost $1 billion provided out to 2028. Priority projects include the military radar program to be delivered by 2028, counter-drone programs, subsea awareness capabilities, software-defined radio systems, H-145M light utility helicopters, and a wide range of force protection equipment. This is not the budget of a state preparing for territorial defence. This is the budget of a state preparing for integration into expeditionary warfare. The military radar program, for instance, is not about defending Irish airspace from an invasion by whom exactly, the question should be asked, but about achieving the situational awareness necessary to participate in NATO and EU air policing operations. The counter-drone systems are not about protecting Irish farms from Russian drones, but about securing the airspace around EU Council meetings and international summits. The benefit for the Irish people here will be precisely nothing. The subsea awareness capabilities are explicitly framed in terms of protecting critical undersea infrastructure, that is, the data cables that carry US corporate communications and financial transactions. But here's the official discourse never addresses. The constraint on Irish defence transformation is not money, it is what the analysts candidly call institutional bandwidth. Now, Ireland maintains a structural fiscal surplus exceeding 2% of GDP annually. The defence budget could be doubled or tripled from existing surpluses without any new taxation. The problem is that the Irish state lacks the procurement capacity, the security clearance infrastructure, and the industrial base to absorb military capital efficiently. The Defence Forces Procurement Office operates with a staff of approximately 15 to 20 people, managing the entire defence equipment acquisition portfolio. This is not a state that is struggling to defend itself against an external threat. This is a state that is building the bureaucratic and institutional infrastructure to become a capable military partner of NATO and the EU. The 6.2% annual growth rate in defence spending, if sustained, would double the budget in approximately 12 years. But the real goal is not the numbers, it is institutional transformation. It's the creation of a defence apparatus that can interoperate with NATO, that can participate in EU battle groups, that can deploy forces abroad under collective security agreements. And that brings us to the most significant institutional change, the dismantling of the so-called triple lock. The triple lock, so-called, is a mechanism that requires three conditions to be met before Irish troops can be deployed overseas: government approval, Doyle confirmation, and crucially, a UN Security Council mandate or UN General Assembly resolution. It was specifically designed to prevent Ireland from being dragged into wars of imperialist aggression without the cover of international law. The wretched cretin Michael Martin, who's the current Taoiseach, has made his position explicit. He has argued that Ireland cannot leave the decision on military deployment to, here's a direct quote from Martin, the approval of Vladimir Putin. Now, this is a ridiculous statement. The UN Security Council is not Putin's personal fiefdom. Russia is one of 5 permanent members with veto power that exists precisely to prevent the UN from being used as a rubber stamp for great power aggression, as it was, for instance, in the run-up to the Iraq War, when the US and Britain tried and failed to secure a Security Council resolution authorizing invasion. The triple lock exists because the Irish people, through their history of anti-imperialist struggle, understand that small nations are routinely sacrificed on the altar of great power politics. It exists because the Irish state was born from a war of national liberation against precisely the kind of imperialist aggression that the UN Charter was designed to prevent. And it exists because the Irish working class has no interest in sending its sons and daughters to die in wars that serve the interests of US multinational capital and European finance. But the triple lock is now being targeted for removal. The government has brought forward plans to scrap it, a move that some opposition parties have correctly identified as a step towards NATO integration. Now, let's be clear about what this means in practice. Ireland already participates in the EU military assistance mission for Ukraine, providing training to Ukrainian forces. It has contributed €100 million in so-called non-lethal military aid plus radar equipment transfers. It has joined the NATO so-called Partnership for Peace back in 1999, participates in EU battle groups, and joined PESCO, the Permanent Structured Cooperation, in 2017. In 2024, Ireland joined NATO's individually tailored partnership program explicitly to increase capabilities at countering potential threats to undersea infrastructure. The triple lock is one of the last remaining barriers to full expeditionary warfare capability. If it is removed, and Ireland can then deploy troops wherever the US or the Germans and the French and the British demand without even the pretense of any kind of legal authorization. If it is removed, then the last constitutional obstacle to NATO membership falls. And here's what the advocates of this change never mention. The Irish Defence Forces currently field around about 7,500 active personnel, well below the already modest establishment strength of 10,000. Recruitment and retention are chronic problems driven by pay concerns, housing pressures, and limited career progression. The forces are demoralised, under-equipped, and struggling to maintain basic capabilities. The idea that this force could make a meaningful contribution to collective security against a hypothetical Russian invasion is farcical. The purpose of militarization is not defense against Russia, as I said. It is integration into the US-led imperialist bloc. But now we must come to the heart of the matter. This is the unspoken truth that no Irish politician, even Sinn Féin these days, dares to really properly articulate. In recent years, it has been revealed that the Irish state has maintained a secret agreement with the British since 1952. That's 74 years now, which allows the Royal Air Force to, quote-unquote, police Irish airspace against what was described as Soviet military intrusions. So let's have that sink in. For 70 years, Irish sovereignty over its own airspace has been effectively a fiction. For 70 years, the British military, the same British military that occupies the 6 counties of Irish territory, that maintains a permanent garrison in Northern Ireland, that has been responsible for centuries of colonial violence, from the plantations to the penal laws to the Great Famine to the Troubles, has been the de facto guardian of the Irish skies. And when this was revealed, what was the response of the Irish political class? Sinn Féin, the party that claims to represent the radical Republican tradition, says it wanted to know more before deciding whether to discontinue it. No more, as if 70 years of secret subordination to the British military required further study before a decision could be made. This is the reality behind the rhetoric of neutrality. The Irish state has never been neutral between imperialism and anti-imperialism. It has never been neutral between the British occupation and the Irish people. It has been neutral only in the sense that it has delegated its military sovereignty to the very power that partitioned the island and maintains that partition to this day. The research that we've done with regards to the Republic of Ireland, we classify Ireland in this research as a core periphery hybrid, corporate tax haven, enclave, functionally integrated into the Anglo-American imperial core, with domestic economy structurally subordinated to US multinational capital. Its hegemonic alignment here is as an EU member and US satellite, formally independent but militarily neutered and economically absorbed into the US technological pharmaceutical supply chains, NATO adjacent via Partnership for Peace and PESCO. This is not a description of a neutral state. This is a description of a subordinate state, a state whose independence was always conditional on non-interference with British imperialist interests, a state whose post-Celtic Tiger financialization, its transformation into a corporate tax haven and platform for US multinational capital, has deepened this dependence while changing its form. The political class in Dublin now answers as much to Wall Street and the European Commission as London. But the structural logic is identical to what it was in 1922, when the Free States' conservative elite prioritized property rights and economic orthodoxy over the social republicanism of the 1916 proclamation. The same class that accepted partition, that accepted the Anglo-Irish Treaty, that accepted the structures of private property and capitalist development over genuine national liberation, that class is now driving NATO integration because the material basis of their power depends upon maintaining Ireland's role within the imperialist system. So let's examine the material basis of this subordination in detail, because without understanding the economics, we cannot understand the politics. The country profile we've developed for Ireland reveals a staggering degree of US corporate dominance. US multinationals dominate the commanding heights of the Irish economy to an extraordinary degree. 25 of the top 50 Irish firms are US controlled, accounting for 70% of their combined revenue. Apple alone constitutes 20% of Irish GDP. The US Bureau of Economic Analysis records American direct investment in Ireland at $468.8 billion, the fifth largest position globally, behind only Britain, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Singapore. These firms utilize Ireland's 12.5% corporate tax rate and sophisticated economic, should we say, tax evasion tools to achieve effective tax rates of 0 to 2.5% profits shifted from higher tax jurisdictions. The result is that Ireland functions not as a national economy, but as a regulatory loophole within the US-dominated global corporate system. The domestic economy tells a radically different story. Ireland now faces the most severe housing crisis in its history. 16,734 people were officially homeless in December of 2025, up from 2,509 in July of 2014. This includes nearly 5,000 children. Rents have gone up over 75% in a decade. Housing costs, after housing costs, 19% of the population lives in poverty, rising to 59% amongst renters. The median property price of €370,000 is unaffordable for working class households. This is not a housing shortage in any material sense. Ireland has more vacant homes per capita than most EU states. It is a crisis of commodification, speculation and state capture by property capital, and it is occurring in a state that has the highest GDP per capita in the EU, that records record corporate tax receipts, that maintains structural fiscal surpluses. The contradiction here is stark and revealing. The Irish state has the fiscal capacity to build public housing, to fund healthcare, and do other things, but it chooses instead to build military radar installations and counter-drone capabilities. It chooses to increase defense spending by 35% while homelessness quadruples. It chooses to integrate into NATO's war machine while its own population struggles with the basic necessities of life. Why? Because the Irish state's primary function is not to serve the Irish people. It is to serve as the condensation of class relations, specifically the condensation of comprador relations between US capital and a domestic political class that manages Ireland's role as a tax platform. The central bank's 2015 to abandon GDP in favor of GNI, that is modified gross national income, as the measure of Irish economic activity, because Apple's restructuring had made GDP growth figures statistically meaningless, represents an extraordinary admission. The Irish state acknowledged that its own headline economic indicator had become a fiction, generated by multinational accounting practices. The trade structure reveals the same dependency. Goods exports reached a record €206.3 billion in 2025, of which medical and pharmaceutical products accounted for 53.2%, that's €138.6 billion, up 39% from 2024. This surge was driven by US tariff front-running and explosive demand for the GLP-1 weight loss drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, Zepbound, whose active pharmaceutical ingredients are produced in Ireland. The US absorbed 42.9% of total Irish exports. The export profile, overwhelmingly concentrated in a single sector and a single market, represents not diversification but hyper-specialization in a niche within the US-dominated global pharmaceutical supply chain. If US pharmaceutical firms relocate production, or if the US imposes tariffs on Irish pharma imports, the fiscal model collapses. The Irish state has no alternative economic base. It has built no autonomous productive capacity. It is entirely dependent upon the goodwill of US corporate capital. And that is why Dublin obeys. Not because the politicians are personally corrupt, although many are, but because the structural position of Irish capitalism leaves them no choice. The Atlantic Council briefing, speaking for the Washington consensus here, is explicit. Quote, "The consensus at the highest levels of government is clear. Ireland must do more to ensure its security in an increasingly complicated and uncertain world. The uncertain world is code for US re-evaluation of its military posture in Europe and the need for European states to fill the gap. Ireland is being asked to pay its tribute." Now, the historical continuity here must be remarked upon. Ireland's colonial experience structured its contemporary political economy more profoundly than the bourgeois media analysis will acknowledge. English and British colonial rule began in 1169, but took its modern form with the plantations of the 16th and 17th centuries, which saw the systematic dispossession of the Irish from their land and its redistribution to English and Scottish settlers. The penal laws excluded Catholics, the majority of the population, from land ownership, education, and political participation. The Act of Union in 1801 abolished the Irish Parliament and integrated Ireland directly into the United Kingdom, eliminating protective tariffs that had supported nascent Irish manufacturing and reducing the country to an agricultural supplier for British industrialisation. The Great Famine of 1845 to 52 remains one of the defining events of Irish history. When the potato blight destroyed the subsistence crop of the rural poor, the British administration allowed over 1 million people to starve while grain and livestock continued to be exported from Ireland to Britain. Over 2 million emigrated, reducing the population from 8.5 million in 1841 to approximately 6 million by 1855, a demographic catastrophe from which Ireland has never recovered. The total population of the Republic today is 5.2 million. That remains below the pre-famine total. The famine was a colonial extermination policy. The British state had the resources to prevent mass death, but deliberately chose not to deploy them, prioritizing food exports over the lives of Irish poor farmers. Post-independence Ireland did attempt economic nationalism under De Valera, but was too small and too poor to achieve autocentric development. The decision to open to foreign capital in the 50s and 60s, the first economic expansion program under T.K. Whitaker, set the trajectory that led to the national corporation dominating of today. Each phase of Irish economic development has deepened the dependency on external capital while failing to build autonomous productive capacity, a pattern that reproduces in a modified form the colonial relationship that has existed with Britain since the independence of the Republic. The Celtic Tiger boom was actually driven by EU structural funds, US multinational corporation investment, attracted by the 12.5% tax rate, and a domestically generated property bubble. The 2008 crash exposed this as a mirage. Domestic banks that engage in reckless property lending and the state's bank guarantee, which socialized approximately 64 billion euros of private banking losses, revealed the class nature of the Irish state with brutal clarity. The subsequent Troika bailout of 67.5 billion euros from the IMF, EU, and European Central Bank imposed austerity that fell heaviest on the workers and the poor, while the multinational corporate sector was, of course, untouched. The current recovery, driven by pharmaceutical exports and continued multinational corporation investment, reproduces the same structural dependency without addressing the housing crisis, healthcare waiting lists, or infrastructure deficits. This is the historical context in which the NATO push must be understood. The Irish bourgeoisie, having failed to achieve genuine national independence or autocentric development, functions as a comprador layer within the imperialist system. Its independence was always conditional. Now, as the US demands greater European contribution to its global confrontation with China and Russia, the Irish state is being called upon to formalize its total subordination. The Good Friday Agreement of 1998 established power sharing in the north and removed the Irish constitution's territorial claim, effectively freezing the status quo. But Brexit has, of course, dramatically altered this context. The Northern Ireland Protocol, later the Windsor Framework, creates a de facto economic border in the Irish Sea. Demographic trends suggest a nationalist majority in the north within the next decade. Sinn Féin won the most seats in the 2022 Northern Assembly election, and this makes reunification, together with Sinn Féin's presence in the Dáil, a live political issue. Yet the British government and the Unionist bloc will always resist bitterly and violently any move towards a border poll. And the Irish political class, rather than confronting this unresolved national question, chooses deeper integration with the very imperialist bloc that guarantees the partition. The NATO push is a form of deferred confrontation, a decision to align with the powers that maintain the status quo rather than challenge it. So, how is this transformation being sold to the Irish public? Through a concentrated ideological apparatus that operates through concentrated corporate media, and the residual legitimacy of the independent struggle is channeled through the Civil War parties. Media ownership is highly concentrated in Ireland. Independent news and media, controlled by the billionaire Dennis O'Brien, publishes the Irish Independent, Sunday Independent, and Belfast Telegraph. RTE, the broadcaster, operates under a funding model which has been systematically undermined by successive governments. The Irish Times, owned by a trust, represents the voice of the liberal professional class. The media structure is perfectly suited to manufacturing consent for NATO membership. The billionaire-owned press pushes the Atlanticist line. The state broadcaster is too weak and subordinated to mount any effective critique of this. The liberal papers provide respectable, so-called opinion for the professional class. And social media, while disrupting this oligopoly, has also facilitated the spread of fascist disinformation, much of which originates with loyalists in Ulster and the British intelligence services. A classic divide and rule strategy that channels working class anger away from property speculators and multinational corporations towards vulnerable minorities. The online far right has gained traction by exploiting the housing crisis to scapegoat migrants and other refugees, and this is not accidental. It is a deliberate strategy to fragment the working class and prevent the emergence of coherent working class and anti-imperialist politics. And what of the polling situation? The Atlantic Council notes that only 19% of the Irish public supports NATO membership, with 49% opposed. This is significant. The Irish people, despite decades of media conditioning, still retain a skepticism toward military alignment that reflects their historical experience of imperialist aggression. But the experience of Sweden and Finland shows public opinion can be overridden when the ruling class decides structural alignment is necessary. The International Institute for Strategic Studies published a remarkable article in February of 2025 titled Ireland's Future, United European and in NATO. The title alone reveals the agenda. The argument is that NATO membership would mitigate the threat to a united Ireland by removing Irish neutrality as a significant strategic obstacle. This is a breathtaking inversion. The obstacle to Irish reunification is not Irish neutrality. It is British occupation, backed by the British military, the British state, and the Unionist bloc. NATO membership would not remove that obstacle. It would embed Ireland more deeply within the very imperialist system that guarantees partition. The article acknowledges that Ireland's NATO membership would not proceed from a cold start. It has already joined several different precursor organisations and groups. It notes that Sinn Féin's expanded voting base showed roughly the same degree of support for Ireland's NATO membership, 46%, as the general population. That is the Gramscian transformation at work, the absorption of a once radical movement into the existing political order till it becomes indistinguishable from it. So let's examine who benefits from this transformation and, of course, who pays for it. But before we get to that, I'll just say again, be sure to like and share the stream if you have not done so already. We have about 400 of you watching at the moment, so be sure to subscribe on all platforms. So who then benefits here? There is a national bourgeoisie in Ireland, but it's very weak relative to the foreign multinational corporation sector. Indigenous Irish capitals such as CRH, Ryanair, Kerry Group, Smurfit Kappa, Dalata Hotels, and Greencore operate successfully in international markets, but does not control the commanding heights of the Irish economy. These are controlled by US pharmaceutical and technology firms. The property sector developers, construction firms, etc., constitute the most powerful political faction of indigenous capital. The REITs, introduced by Fine Gael Labour government in 2013, provide tax-advantaged vehicles for institutional investors to acquire residential and commercial property, directly fueling the housing crisis by prioritising investor returns over housing need. The class structure explains the political class's behaviour. Politicians of Dublin do not represent an independent national bourgeoisie with interests distinct from imperialism. They represent a comprador layer that manages Ireland's role within US-dominated corporate systems. Their personal and political interests are tied to the mates of this system. The bourgeoisie and professional managerial class has expanded significantly during the Celtic Tiger, but has been destabilized by the housing crisis. University graduates face starting salaries that cannot cover the exorbitant Dublin rents, let alone mortgage deposits. The generation rent phenomenon, young professionals in their 30s and 40s still renting, unable to accumulate capital for home purchase, represents a proletarianization of layers that historically formed the base of property-owning conservatism. This explains the volatility of Irish electoral politics. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, the two centre-right civil war parties that have governed Ireland since independence, have seen their combined vote decline from 80% to 43% in the 2024 election, a historic low, yet no left alternative has consolidated this discontent. The political class's push for NATO membership is, in part, an attempt to stabilise its position through alignment with the imperialist powers that guarantee its economic base, even as its domestic legitimacy erodes. And the working class, what of them? The trade union movement, organised through the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, with SIPTU as the largest affiliate, approximately 200,000 members, has not recovered from social partnership's demobilising effect. The period of social partnership from 1987 to 2009 transformed the union leadership into a Labour lieutenancy of capital, channeling worker discontent into institutionalised bargaining rather than industrial action. The Irish Congress of Trade Union has not called a general strike for over 100 years, nearly 100 years. The Labour Party, the party of once of James Connolly and Jim Larkin, collapsed from 37 seats in 2011 to 7 in 2016 and has not recovered, winning approximately 4% in the 2024 election. This collapse confirms our analysis here. Social democratic parties that manage austerity for capital are consumed by the working class base they betray and ultimately destroyed. Sinn Féin is now the dominant force on the Irish left and the most politically ambiguous. Emerging from the provisional IRA's armed campaign, it transitioned to bourgeois democratic politics in the 90s and is now the largest party in Northern Ireland and the leading opposition party in the Republic. Its programme combines elements of left populist rhetoric with certain nationalist priorities, but increasingly rightward moves on economic issues, and has, of course, been relentlessly for the war on Russia. Now, in government in Northern Ireland, Sinn Féin ministers have implemented austerity budgets and public sector pay cuts. The party's trajectory from armed republicanism to electoralist nationalism with left rhetoric again exemplifies the Gramscian concept of transformism. The absorption of radical movements into the existing order. More significantly, Sinn Féin has moved significantly rightward on military neutrality. It has softened its opposition to the withdrawal of the triple lock. It has abandoned firm pledges to withdraw from EU defence agreements. When the secret Anglo-Irish airspace agreement was revealed, Sinn Féin, of course, only said that they wanted to know more about it. This is not the language of anti-imperialism. This is the language of accommodation. So, before we get to the conclusion here, we must examine the vexed question of the Shannon Airport issue. If you want to understand the reality of Irish neutrality, just look at Shannon Airport. Since 2001, it is said that close to 3 million US troops have passed through Shannon Airport on their way towards in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. Between 2022 and 2024, nearly 2,000 US military and civil aircraft with declared munitions of war on board applied for exemptions to stop in Ireland. In 2024 alone, 357 US military aircraft landed at Irish airports. Only 0.1% of applications from US civil aircraft were refused by the Irish authorities. The Irish government claims that these aircraft are unarmed and not participating in military operations. These claims are contradicted by photographic evidence of armed aircraft at Shannon and the testimony of US soldiers who carried weapons through the airport. This is not neutrality, this is complicity. Ireland provides logistical support for US military operations while maintaining the diplomatic fiction of non-alignment. And this complicity extends to the current proxy war. Ireland participates in the EU military assistance mission to Ukraine, providing aid to Ukrainian armed forces. It has contributed €100 million in non-lethal military aid, plus radar equipment transfers. The non-lethal designation is a legal fiction. Radar equipment is used to direct lethal strikes. Training Ukrainian soldiers is preparation for combat. This is participation in war, whatever the diplomatic labels. The NATO push is simply the formalization of this complicity, the removal of the hypocrisy, the acknowledgement that Ireland has been a participant in the US-led imperialist system all along, and might as well make it official. So you want to talk about a Russian threat to Ireland. The Irish political class have been participating indirectly in a war on Russia. So they have turned Ireland into a belligerent state already, one that is aiding the war on Russian territory. So here we must turn as our final examination to the unresolved national question. The partition of Ireland into the 26-county republic and the 6 counties occupied by the British in the north remains the unresolved contradiction in Irish history, and it is inseparable from the NATO question. The British state maintains a permanent military presence in Northern Ireland. The 6 counties remain under British control. The Loyalist bloc, backed by the British, resists any move towards reunification, and, as we've seen recently, had the capability to mobilize en masse and create chaos in the streets whenever they choose to. And the Irish political class, rather than confronting this reality, chooses to integrate more deeply into the European and Atlantic structures to guarantee that this status quo remains. For a Marxist analysis, the national question in Ireland is inseparable from the class question. A united Ireland under the political leadership of Sinn Féin would not challenge the structures of capitalist dependency. It would not break from the multinational corporation-dominated economic model. It would not address the housing crisis, the healthcare crisis, or anything else. It would be a constitutional adjustment, not a democratic transformation. A socialist Ireland requires the transcendence of both partition and the economic model dominated by multinational corporations. It requires public ownership of strategic sectors, democratic economic planning, and a break from the tax haven relationship with US imperialism. And it requires a foreign policy of genuine non-alignment, not the fake neutrality that exists at the moment, but principled opposition to imperialist aggression in all its forms. The NATO push, therefore, is not merely a military question. It is a national question. It is a class question. It is a question of whether Ireland will remain a subordinate node in the imperialist system, or whether it will seek a path of genuine independence and socialist development. So, there is an immediate series of tasks, which, of course, many on the Irish left are taking up. But these probably should include things like demanding not only a mass program of public house building in terms of building a movement against the political establishment, but also anti-eviction work to challenge the property speculators. Also, that the trade union to be broken from the model of social partnership, which many of them are still locked into ideologically, and rebuild independent working class organisation in Ireland. There also needs to be, of course, a challenge to Sinn Féin from the left that exposes the gap between its rhetoric and its reality. And there needs to be further working class solidarity built between those in the north and those in the south to campaign for a socialist Ireland, the only way that the national question can be truly solved. And the national question needs to be addressed as an economic question, breaking from the tax haven model through the public ownership of strategic sectors and a democratically planned economy. The current conjuncture, post-Brexit instability, The OECD minimum tax challenge to the Irish model, the intensifying housing crisis, demographic change in the north, do create openings for this kind of Irish socialist republicanism that did exist over a decade ago. The ruling class's management of these crises has been incompetent, self-serving, weak, and has eroded their own legitimacy. But the gap between the ruling class's weakness and the left's capacity to exploit it remains a central strategic problem. Without a party capable of organising the growing discontent into coherent political alternatives, Ireland's revolutionary potential will continue to dissipate into electoral cycles that return the same class enemies to power, and the push for NATO membership will proceed as the material power of imperialism imposes its will for the compliant agency of the Dublin political establishment. James Connolly, writing in 1915, understood precisely what would happen if the Irish working class did not seize the revolutionary moment. He wrote, quote, "If you remove the English army tomorrow and hoist the green flag over Dublin Castle, unless you set about the organisation of the Socialist Republic, your efforts would be in vain. England would still rule you. She would rule you through her capitalists, through her landlords, through her financiers, and through the whole array of commercial and individualist institutions she has planted in this country and watered with the tears of our mothers and the blood of our martyrs." James Connolly was executed by the British Army in 1916 for his role in planning and carrying out the Easter Rising, but his warning is prophetic. The English army was removed from the 26 counties, but England and America and Europe rule Ireland still, through their capitalists, through their financiers, through the whole array of commercial and individualist institutions planted in the country. And now, through the demand that Ireland join NATO and militarise itself in service of the imperialist war machine. The push for NATO membership is not a response to Russian aggression. This is nonsense. It is the ideological superstructure catching up with the material base of a state that has been functionally integrated into US imperialism for over 70 years. The Irish political class, Michael Martin, Simon Harris, Leo Varadkar, and their counterparts across the other parties, are not traitors in the moral sense. They are organic representatives of a comprador bourgeoisie that has no material interest in challenging the imperialist system that guarantees its position. The real threat to Ireland is, of course, not Russia. It is Britain, the power that occupies the six counties, that maintains the permanent military base there, that maintains the loyalist paramilitaries, that maintains the ability to mobilize mobs in the north to carry out pogroms, that has used Irish territory for its wars for a century and more. It is also the United States, the power that dominates the Irish economy through the $466.8 billion in direct investment, that controls the commanding heights of the Irish economy, that uses Shannon Airport as a military staging post. The other threat is, of course, the European Union, the power that subordinates Irish monetary policy to the ECB, that disciplines Irish fiscal policy through the Stability and Growth Act, that demands military integration through PESCO and the European Defence Fund. The question is whether the Irish working class can organise itself to resist this transformation, whether the housing crisis, the cost of living crisis, the healthcare crisis, the objective conditions that are extraordinarily favourable can be translated into a subjective political capacity, whether a revolutionary party can emerge that is adequate to Ireland's specific formation. Now, this brings us to the end of our analysis of the Irish neutrality question. I hope that this has been illuminating, and I hope that it leads you to have fundamental questions about the Irish political or bourgeois politics that exist at the moment. Okay, just going to go through and say hello to some more people who've come in here. Hello to Anthony from Prague. Hello to Almir from the What's Future Socialist Yugoslavia. Hello to Pricken. Spiral Eye says most people here are unfortunately quite pro-EU, though less so the younger they are. I think a referendum to join NATO would fail. Michael Martin said in 2022 it wouldn't be needed. Yeah, they won't do a referendum. Or if they do, they'll just keep you voting until you get the right result. You know, that's what they did in Ireland in the 90s and 2000s with certain EU treaties. They basically just restaged the referendum and ran a scare story until everybody voted the right way. Hello to Arnold and Speedy. Bruce Albert says, looks like quite possible that NATO depleted munitions were hit last night in Kiev. Expect birth defects as part of the comprador inheritance for years to come. Indeed. President Jesus says, does Guinness taste better in Ireland from a pub? What is it? This is what we're told in America when we crack open a bottle and it tastes like piss. Yeah, draft Guinness is always better, you know. Okay. So, yes, Irish neutrality, a fiction to a large extent, but that doesn't mean that the attempts to shove Ireland into NATO should not be resisted, and that the bullshit that's talked by the people that propose it should not be challenged. It certainly should be, and if the working class can be mobilised against it, then that's something that certainly should be done. It's just that if you challenge the push towards militarisation and NATO membership, you're going to end up challenging the economic model as well, because that's where it all flows from. Now, before we come to a conclusion this evening, I will say a couple of things about the World Cup. First of all, of course, Scotland went out in a miserable display of utter uselessness, but that's, again, not exactly the first time. England played a very good game against Mexico last night. I watched it. It was very entertaining. Though whoever invented video assistant refereeing should be taken out and hanged by his entrails, to be quite frank. So the tournament itself has produced some interesting games, but if you want that, you can go and listen to the Myriad of Football podcast. What I'm going to talk about here is the actions of a certain Donald J. Trump again, because Donald Trump has done what he always done and what he has a great gift for, which is the revealing of the essence of something. No one reveals the essence of something quicker than Donald Trump. It is perhaps his most unique talent. He reveals the fundamentally brutal and very corrupt and rapacious nature of the US political system by being the most brutal, bloodthirsty, and corrupt person within it, and by being openly and nakedly corrupt and getting away with it in a way that worries the rest of the American political establishment, not because they're sincerely concerned about corruption, but they're worried that Trump is giving the game away. And so he was revealed this week the essential corruption and feebleness of FIFA, that it grovels to the most powerful states in the world. Just as we saw when Infantino gave Trump his cherished Peace Prize. Trump, of course, couldn't get the Nobel Peace Prize. They didn't want to give it to him, so they gave it to Machado, a regime change candidate for Venezuela, who's now been cast aside by Trump. But they gave that Gianni Infantino, the president of FIFA, gave Trump this ridiculous, made-up Peace Prize, and Trump's like, "I got an award. I got an award. Most investment ever." And Infantino has been just relentlessly groveling to Trump. But of course, Trump could choose, and indeed has chosen, or the American administration has chosen, to make the tournament more difficult for those who are competing in it. There's been repeated denials of visas. There's been refusal to let certain Iranian players and officials in. There's been the systematic harassment of the Iranian team that was certainly something that the US government dreamed up, that FIFA actively collaborated in. And then, of course, there is the question of the rescinding of the red card against the US player Balogun, because Trump put a call into Infantino, and then the FIFA announced, the red card, Balogun's red card is suspended. The suspension will come later. So what Trump has done, and again, he's done us a great favor in the way that he's done this. He just revealed absolutely out in the open just what a fundamentally political organization FIFA is, and secondly, what a completely and utterly corrupt organization FIFA is. It always has been. I mean, it's always been bizarre to me, the idea that football internationally is controlled by this federation run out of Switzerland, staffed by this corrupt, completely unaccountable group of football officials, and that they get to decide when the World Cup is played, and they own it and they profit from it. And they have towards weaker countries, submitted a whole list of demands, such as being given power over the judicial system to prosecute people for breaking copyright laws. This is what happened in South Africa in 2012 when there was the World Cup in South Africa. No, 2010, I think it was the World Cup in South Africa. So this is all the talk about refusal of political interference. That's only ever targeted at weaker countries. When the US chooses to politically interfere, Infantino just says "Sí, señor" and obeys. And he's just revealed like that FIFA as an organization should just be abolished. It should be completely broken up and replaced with something else. But of course, it won't be, because all the other federations that make up the various different regional federations, like UEFA, the European Football Association, they're just as corrupt and just as in on the payoffs as FIFA are. So this is all one absolutely horrendous, corrupt morass that is essentially run now by the imperialist countries, that systematically discriminates against and undermines nations like Iran, who have the temerity to resist imperialism. This is FIFA. And one of the demands that we should make, amongst many related to football, is that FIFA is abolished and everybody who's involved with FIFA is immediately imprisoned. We did have an interesting comment from Comrade Davey on the Telegram chat suggesting that after the revolution, all FIFA officials should be shot. I will add an amendment to say not until they've been in front of a revolutionary proletarian tribunal and have had a chance to make their case. But this football is no longer just football, to pick up on what Mogman Dog is saying in the comments. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Now, Mogman Dog, you asked, what does Trump gain from revealing his corruption and participation in this corruption? Trump revels in his own power and his ability to make people humiliate themselves and compromise themselves and do things. Trump has always reveled in that, whether he's on The Apprentice or running the office of the president. And his ability to get international organizations to do his bidding is something that he enjoys. So, of course, he's going to boast and going to brag about it. We're going to win the next game. We're going to best investment ever. He's going to boast about it. He's going to brag about it. And he's going to reveal things that previous presidents wouldn't have revealed. Previous presidents might even have not bothered to intervene, but as the ratings are high for the World Cup and everybody's tweeting about it, Trump has to get involved. Now, we can only hope that in the battle of the imperialists, that the minor league imperialists, that's the Belgians, dump out the US tonight, but I wouldn't hold my breath about that. They will. I imagine FIFA will be doing everything they possibly can to rig it in favor of the US, so that Trump doesn't, have ICE agents arrest the entire FIFA hierarchy or something there and hold them hostage until the US is allowed to progress through the tournament. But I hope that the Belgians batter the US. Don't get me wrong. Belgium has its own history of horrendous colonialism. It's just these days that the American system is, of course, so much worse. And no, it won't be a video-assisted revolutionary tribunal, though I appreciate the joke, Global Village idiot. Video-assisted refereeing is got to be one of the worst inventions of all time. Together with like the laws that exist now on like tackles, which seek to make it a non-contact sport. Essentially, it's killing the game stone dead. When you get all these video appeals. That's why if I go to a football game these days, it will only ever be like a lower league game. I will not go to like top division games. Nobody should, whether it's in Scotland or England or anywhere else, because this is not a working class game. It is a giant money-making enterprise, and the best thing you can do is to withdraw your custom from it. Go to a lower league team, go to a community-owned team, a fan-owned team, give your support and your money to them. It's cheaper, you'll have a better time, and you'll actually have a genuinely authentic experience. Not this fucking plastic, upper-middle-class dominated corporate product that is there to please bankers and property speculators and highly paid lawyers, nobody else. Fuck FIFA and fuck the top divisions as well. Fan football is the way to go. It is the only way to go. And with that, I will bring this to a close for this evening. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. The first episode of the course on Marxist state theory will be going out tomorrow at 7 p.m. on Patreon, and we will be examining the first 2 chapters of Lenin's State and Revolution. So please be sure to join us for that. But until tomorrow, I bid you good day.